When I was in college, my best friend, let's call him John for privacy, and I were pretty much inseparable. We even lived together, which made things nice. However, neither of us was exactly the sharpest tool in the shed. I'm not talking about intelligence, but more about our tendency to make a lot of impulsive, bad decisions. We were always getting ourselves into trouble, doing things like checking out abandoned houses or attempting dangerous, often illegal stunts. Think climbing water towers and similar foolishness. One particular night, we came up with an idea that seemed comparatively less dangerous and crazy than our usual exploits. We thought it would be cool to explore the woods behind our town in the dead of night. Maybe we'd get a rush of adrenaline. Now, these woods surrounded our small town on all sides, but the area we wanted to check out was at the back, a place nobody really went. Not normal people anyway. John and I had never been there either. A large portion of the town on that side had been abandoned following a massive fire decades prior. Consequently, the woods there felt abandoned too, with no trails or anything. We grabbed our flashlights and set off. It was a 30-minute walk from campus to the back of town, and another 10 minutes through the burnt-out sections to reach the forest edge. Once we were sure the coast was clear, we switched on our flashlights and headed into the trees. Just a couple of minutes in, the town lights disappeared entirely. From then on, only the faint moonlight and our small beams guided us through the darkness. Honestly, for the first 20 minutes or so, it wasn't all that special. After the initial spooky feeling of entering a dark forest at night wore off, it was just quiet, and there wasn't much to see, just trees, endlessly more trees. No abandoned structures or anything weird. That changed completely out of the blue when John spotted something up ahead. A light cutting through the darkness between the trees. It was definitely a flashlight, not a flickering campfire or any natural phenomenon. Oddly, it seemed to be low, almost on the ground. As we got closer, we realized that's exactly what it was. A flashlight just sitting there on the ground, unattended. There was nothing else around it, no sign of a campsite. Since it was a standard battery-operated flashlight, someone must have held it recently. Definitely that night, otherwise the batteries would have been dead. Neither of us could figure out how someone would forget a flashlight or drop it without noticing, because it was a significant light source in an otherwise pitch-black forest. We figured someone likely dropped it while running, and if they hadn't come back for it, they must have been running from something. A chill ran down my spine, which should have been our cue to leave. But the adrenaline starting to pump through us as we shone our lights around was kind of what we were hoping for. Still, we decided it was best to just leave the flashlight alone in case we were wrong and someone was coming back for it. I led the way deeper into the woods, with John following closely. Both of us were now curious to see what else we might discover. We were sort of hoping to piece together the story behind that strange discovery. Not even 2 minutes after we'd moved away from the flashlight, we heard a sudden crack behind us. It was multiple cracks, like 3 or 4 sticks breaking one after another, somewhere just 20 or 30 feet behind where John was standing. We both spun around but saw nothing. It definitely kept our nerves on edge. We walked another 5 minutes in silence before hearing that same kind of sound again, seemingly just behind John. I was certain it sounded like someone running quickly across the forest floor. But again, we saw absolutely nothing. However, after the second time, both of us were seriously creeped out. This was more than just an exciting adrenaline rush. It was actual fear, the feeling that we were in real danger. It's crazy, because we both thought this particular adventure was so much less intense than our usual exploits. What were the actual chances of running into someone in the woods in the middle of the night? Especially in this part of the woods? We still weren't 100% sure it was a person we kept hearing, but it sure sounded like it. This must have happened 5 or 6 times before the next occurrence. When we heard the sound again and turned around, we just barely saw a shadow move out of the beam of our lights and behind a tree. John must have seen it too, because we both froze, staring behind us much longer than we had after the previous sounds. Just 10 seconds later, we saw a figure shift his head. Peering around the tree at us, we immediately bolted, running to the side and heading back the way we came. I'd say we sprinted through the trees for about 5 minutes straight, before slowing down to catch our breath. We then walked back to town with our flashlights on their dimmest setting. Oddly, we didn't see the flashlight on our way back. Someone, maybe the person we'd seen, must have picked it up and turned it off. Back at campus, we just couldn't believe what had happened. The idea of someone stalking us through the woods at night made no sense. Now, neither of us can confirm if this was related to our experience. But a few days later, the town reported that someone was missing. Last seen heading toward the back of town. It's impossible to say if they went missing back there, in the woods, or if whatever happened to them was connected to what we experienced. I guess it's just the thought of what we might have stumbled upon in those woods that still feels so disturbing. Had we let that strange man continue stalking us, or had we gone even deeper into the forest, I don't know what we would have found or if we would have made it back. Story 2, by Anonymous. A few years ago, I moved from the far west coast, about 1,000 miles inland. The drive took me through the northern part of the U.S., so not the main highways that most people take across the country. These were much less traveled roads. Unless you're specifically going to the major cities, you likely have to take several side roads. It was a scenic drive at least, but after making the trip back and forth multiple times, the novelty wore off. This was on my final drive, with the last of my belongings from the move packed in the trunk. I spent a whole day driving and reached a small town where I took a nap around 6 p.m. I woke up at 9 p.m. and continued on the road. However, just an hour out of town, my car started acting up. Several maintenance lights illuminated, and the steering felt completely off. It only worsened over the next 5 minutes. Soon it was clear I couldn't drive it anymore. I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder of the road. It felt almost like a cruel joke that this had to happen as far away from any town as possible. Based on previous drives, I knew there weren't any towns for an hour in either direction. There was no cell service out there either, just woods surrounding the road in all directions and not a single soul on it. I slumped back in my seat for a moment, then got out to examine the car. I knew absolutely nothing about cars, but I don't know. Maybe I was hoping something was obviously broken, but there wasn't. The car was probably just at the end of its lifespan. After being outside for a couple of minutes, I started to realize how incredibly creepy the road was. The dim, widely spaced streetlights and the trees stretching out seemingly forever. It was also completely silent. Ironically, I remember thinking it felt exactly like a scene from a horror movie. But anyway, I knew my only option was to get someone to stop and help, whether they gave me a ride to the next gas station or whatever. So I stood by my car, leaning against it, and waited for a car to pass. I was surprised that after 15 minutes, not only did a car come down the road, but it stopped for me. It pulled right up beside me, and the driver rolled down his window. The man looked to be in his mid-30s, smoking a cigarette, and he studied me for a few seconds before asking if I was okay. I suppose it made sense that he'd be skeptical about picking up a random stranger on the side of the road. I explained the situation with my car. He took a few more moments to consider. As he did, he kept checking his mirrors. Maybe it was just a gut feeling, but something felt very off about this guy. This wasn't really the time to be choosy about help, but every alarm in my head was going off, warning me not to get in his car. Well, why don't you hop in? I'll give you a lift to the next town. I wouldn't mind helping someone out tonight. I hesitated for a second, unsure how to turn down his offer without causing trouble. Actually, I've got a friend on his way. Should be just a few minutes out. Sorry, I should have mentioned that. The guy nodded and gave a not-so-friendly smirk, then quickly drove away and vanished down the road. That reaction was all I needed to know I'd made the right choice. However, that was the last car that came by for the entire hour, maybe even longer. I hadn't realized I was on such a desolate road, but apparently I was. And the fact that it was the middle of the night certainly didn't help. I was practically nodding off against the side of my car when headlights came down the road. This time, they were coming from the direction I was heading. I waved to get their attention, and they slowed down and pulled up beside me. Oddly, the car looked familiar, almost like the same one that had stopped earlier. Although I hadn't really looked closely, so it could have just been another dark sedan. They all seemed to look the same anyway. Plus, when the window rolled down, it was a woman driving. She looked to be maybe in her late 20s. She immediately asked if I needed help, though something about it felt strange. She had a nervous smile as if she wasn't entirely comfortable offering help. I explained that I just needed a ride to anywhere, a gas station, a town, whatever. She nodded and unlocked the passenger door. I wasn't about to turn down another offer, so I got in. Immediately, the atmosphere felt disturbingly wrong. She didn't say anything and just stared straight ahead at the road, her eyes wide. "Thank you for picking me up. I don't know what I'd do if you hadn't," I said, trying to make conversation. She never even asked what happened to my car or why I was stranded. She didn't respond at all, still staring fixedly ahead. Something was really strange about her, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. So I sat back and tried to relax as we drove in silence. This silence continued for about 20 minutes when I noticed a sign for a gas station 2 miles ahead. I felt relieved and told her she could drop me off when we got there. She didn't look at me, just gave a short nod and maintained a straight face. Now that we were getting close, though, I decided to ask her if everything was all right. The woman glanced at me, then back forward. Her eyes seemed almost scared, which kind of freaked me out. And just then, I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. I looked and saw it was the rear-view mirror. Whatever had moved was reflected there. So naturally, I looked back. My heart sank instantly. The back seat was dark, but a figure was sitting right behind my seat, hunched over as if trying to stay out of sight. The moment I looked at him, though, he sat up straight. I could just make out that it was the same guy who had stopped on the road earlier, the one I'd refused a ride from, and he looked furious. I quickly looked forward and saw the gas station up ahead. I told the woman to pull in and drop me off immediately, but she wasn't slowing down. She was going to drive past it. And that's when I realized what was happening. This woman was a victim too. She was probably being forced by the man in the back seat to pick me up and keep driving wherever he wanted to take us. I started trying to persuade her to turn off at the gas station, but the man yelled over me, ordering me to shut up and telling her to keep driving. As we approached the turnoff, still going at least 50 mph, she suddenly and sharply turned in, slamming on the brakes just before hitting the gas pumps. Immediately, she jumped out of the vehicle. That was my cue to go too. We both bolted for the gas station doors. Once inside, she told the night clerk to call the police while I watched the man move to the front seat and speed away. Long story short, it was exactly what I suspected. Both me and the woman were victims of that creepy guy, presumably trying to kidnap us. Honestly, I'm really thankful she had the courage to defy the man's threats and pull into the gas station anyway. She could have easily obeyed him and kept driving. And I don't know what would have happened then. Thankfully, I don't have to find out. Story 3. By Jane K.I. Work at a small 24/7 diner located off a highway. It's nothing glamorous at all. The owner is a good friend of mine and I needed a job just to get by for a while. It was also much better than working at a regular diner because this place was never crowded, at least not all at once. It was just a pull-off from the highway, where truckers or people on road trips would typically stop for a coffee or a quick meal before getting back on the road. This made for some interesting customers. But because I worked overnight, it was usually very quiet, and this particular night was no exception. Only 2 or 3 customers stopped by for a quick cup of coffee, then left to continue their journeys. After they left, there was a whole hour with no activity. I just sat by the windows looking out at the empty highway, lost in thought. Eventually, around 1 a.m., a truck pulled into the parking lot. So I went around the counter to greet the 2 men as they walked in. Both looked exhausted from a long drive and ordered the same thing everyone else had that night: 2 regular black coffees to go. After ordering, one went to the restroom while the other sat at the bar as I prepared their drinks. "Hey, I have a weird question," one of them said. "You aren't alone here, are you?" That question made me hesitate for a second. I couldn't figure out what he was getting at. I decided to just tell the truth, though. He didn't seem to have any bad intentions. "Yeah, just me tonight. It's been slow, so I don't mind it." He looked almost confused for a second, like he hadn't expected that answer, or maybe had been hoping it wasn't true. "Well, just be careful," he said. "We saw some guy at the side of the building as we drove in. He looked like he was up to no good, but I don't know. I thought he might have worked here. That's why I asked." I thanked him for the heads up. By then, the other guy had come out of the restroom. I gave them both their coffees, and they headed out, pulling back onto the highway. After they left, I went back up to the window and looked out at both sides of the parking area, but it was completely empty. I had been watching outside all night, so I would have seen if someone else had pulled in. Besides, we only had parking in the front, so their vehicle would have been visible. The guy didn't seem like he was lying, though. After a minute, curiosity got the better of me. I went outside and looked around the building. I didn't see anyone, so I walked all the way around. There was nothing. It did feel a little creepy out there with the dark woods surrounding the building, so I didn't want to push my luck. I went back inside. Surely the trucker had just mistaken something that wasn't really there. I mean, he did look tired, and obviously he hadn't meant any harm. I kept my eyes open from that point forward, though. The diner remained deserted. No customers, and really not many cars passing by on the highway either. It was a very slow night. I did some of the dishes and swept the floor, then took a break and went to the restroom for a minute. I was on my phone, so I was definitely taking my time, but at some point while I was in there, I heard a door open. I quickly finished up and headed back to the main area. "Welcome in," I said, using my typical cheerful customer service voice as I walked out into the diner. But I immediately stopped in my tracks when I looked up. There was nobody sitting at any of the tables. After a second, I nervously walked around, but there was still nobody inside. I knew for sure I'd heard the door open. I was very familiar with that sound. I went over and pushed it open, looking around outside too. No cars. I tested the door a couple of times, and it definitely wasn't flimsy. It wouldn't just fly open on its own. And there wasn't even any wind outside. My stomach tightened. I couldn't help but think about the truckers saying someone was lurking around the building. Maybe he was right. I tried to shake off the paranoia and decided to finish the dishes. Surely I was just scaring myself, I thought. I stayed behind the counter, scrubbing the leftover dishes from the earlier shifts. Amidst the clatter of the dishes, I suddenly heard something else. It sounded like something moving. I quickly turned off the water and put down the plate I was cleaning. I heard it again. Before I could round the corner to investigate, a man came around the corner. He walked out from the back room. He looked to be around 40, with a grayish beard and medium-length messy hair. He wore a navy blue disheveled hoodie. He smiled and sat down at the bar seat while I just stood there, stunned, unsure how he got back there or what he was doing. "Of course," I wanted to ask, but I was scared of the answer I might get. "I'll have a coffee, please," the guy suddenly said, breaking the silence. I nodded and reluctantly started making it. I could feel his eyes burning into the back of my head as I faced away from the counter. I just hoped that if I gave him what he wanted, he would leave. I handed him his drink and he smiled. "Just you here, huh? I bet it gets lonely. Doesn't seem many people come around here at this time of night." Sometimes, I guess, but it's not too bad," I replied. I really hated every second of this guy being there, but he just kept talking. "How long are they making you work overnight? Like until 3 or 4 a.m.? I told him my shifts varied a lot, not wanting to give him any information about my schedule. Finally, he stood up and thanked me, giving another creepy smile as he walked out. I watched as he went up to the road, never getting into any car, and just walked until I couldn't see him anymore. My heart was still racing. Something about him was off in a really creepy, unsettling way. I kept my eyes glued to the windows for the next 15 minutes. I suppose it was just how little I knew about what was happening that made the whole thing so unsettling. Was this the guy the trucker was talking about? Or was it someone else? If it was him, that would mean he'd been lurking around the building for the last few hours, which would be even creepier. I really didn't want to go back to cleaning the dishes or doing anything else, feeling very uncomfortable every time I had my back to the doors. But then, as I was still staring at the empty highway, I heard that same sound I'd heard while in the restroom earlier, a door opening. But since I was in the main room, I knew it wasn't the front door. It was the side access door, the one used for going to the dumpster. I hurried around the counter and looked down the hallway. It was dark back there, but one of the closet doors was swaying back and forth, as if someone had just passed through it. I instantly ran outside, got in my car and pulled onto the highway, calling the police as I drove away. When the cops arrived, surprisingly, the guy was still there, hiding in the closet. The same guy who had come in and creeped me out. But that wasn't nearly the most disturbing discovery they made. The guy had rope with him, and after a more thorough search around the diner, they found a stash partially dug up in the forest behind the building. Inside it was basically a collection of gear for doing, let's just say, terrible things. I guess he had been watching the diner and eventually came in to confirm. I was alone before going back to retrieve his equipment, so he could quickly grab me and drag me into the woods where the rest of his gear was. Thankfully, he's locked up for a very long time now,